Chapter 11, Dal Breaks a Promise. For a moment, the others just stared at their Garvian crewmate. Then Jack Alvarez snorted. "You'd better go back and get some rest," he said. "This has been a tougher grind than I thought. You're beginning to show the strain."
"No, I mean it," Dal said earnestly. "I think that is exactly what's been happening."
Tiger looked at him with concern. "Dal, this is no time for double talk and nonsense."
"It's not nonsense," Dal said. "It's the answer if you'll only stop and think."
"An intelligent virus," Jack said. "Who ever heard of such a thing? There's never been a life form like that reported since the beginning of the galactic exploration."
"But that doesn't mean there couldn't be one," Dal said. "And how would an exploratory crew ever identify it if it existed? How would they ever even suspect it? They'd miss it completely, unless it happened to get into trouble itself and try to call for help." Dal jumped up in excitement. "Look, I've seen a dozen articles showing how such a thing was theoretically possible. A virus life form with billions of submicroscopic parts acting together to form an intelligent colony. The only thing a virus creature would need that other intelligent creatures don't need would be some kind of host, some sort of animal body to live in so that it could use its intelligence."
"It's impossible," Jack said scornfully. "Why don't you give it up and get some rest? Here we sit with our feet in the fire, and all you can do is dream up foolishness like this."
"I'm not so sure it's foolishness," Tiger Martin said slowly. "Jack, maybe he's got something. A couple of things would fit that don't make sense at all." "All sorts of things would fit," Dal said. "The viruses we know have to have a host, some other life form to live in. Usually they are parasites, damaging or destroying their hosts and giving nothing in return. But some set up real partnership housekeeping with their hosts so that both are better off."
"You mean a symbiotic relationship?" Jack said.
"Of course," Dal said. "Now suppose these virus creatures were intelligent and came from some other place looking for a new host they could live with. They wouldn't look for an intelligent creature, they would look for some unintelligent creature with a good, strong body that would be capable of doing all sorts of things if it only had an intelligence to guide it. Suppose these virus creatures found a simple-minded, unintelligent race on this planet and tried to set up a symbiotic relationship with it. The virus creature would need a host to provide a home and a food supply. Maybe they, in turn, could supply the intelligence to raise the host to a civilized level of life and performance. Wouldn't that be a fair basis for a sound partnership?" Jack scratched his head doubtfully.
"And you're saying that these virus creatures came here after the exploratory ship had come and gone?"
"They must have. Maybe they only came a few years ago, maybe only months ago. But when they tried to invade the unintelligent creatures the exploratory ship found here, they discovered that the new host's body couldn't tolerate them. His body reacted as if they were parasitic invaders, and built up antibodies against them, and those body defenses were more than the virus could cope with." Dal pointed to the piles of notes on the desk. "Don't you see how it all adds up? Right from the beginning, we've been assuming that these monkey-like creatures here on this planet were the dominant intelligent life forms. Anatomically, they were ordinary cellular creatures like you and me, and when we examined them, we expected to find the same sort of biochemical reactions we'd find with any such creatures. And all our results came out wrong, because we were dealing with a combination of two creatures, the host and a virus. Maybe the creatures on 31 Brucker 7 were naturally blank-faced idiots before the virus came, or maybe the virus was forced to damage some vital part just in order to fight back. But it was the virus that was being killed by its own host, not the other way around." Jack studied the idea, no longer scornful.
"So you think the virus creature called for help, hoping we could find some way to free them from the hosts that were killing them? And when Fuzzy developed a powerful antibody against them, and we started using the stuff..." Jack broke off, shaking his head in horror. "Dal, if you're right, we were literally slaughtering our own patients when we gave those injections down there." "Exactly," Dal said. "Is it any wonder they're so scared of us now? It must have looked like a deliberate attempt to wipe them out, and now they're afraid that we'll go get help and really move in against them." Tiger nodded. "Which was precisely what we were planning, if you stop to think about it. Maybe that was why they were so reluctant to tell us anything about themselves. Maybe they've already been mistaken for parasitic invaders before, wherever in the universe they came from." "But if this is true, then we're really in a jam," Jack said. "What can we possibly do for them? We can't even repair the damage that we've already done. What sort of treatment can we use?" Dal shook his head. "I don't know the answer to that one, but I do know we've got to find out if we're right. An intelligent virus creature has as much right to life as any other intelligent life form. If we've guessed right, then there's a lot that our intelligent friends down there haven't told us. Maybe there'll be some clue there. We've just got to face them with it and see what they say." Jack looked at the view screen, at the angry mob milling around on the ground, held back from the ship by the energy screen. "You mean just go out there and say, 'Look, fellas, it was all a mistake. We didn't really mean to do it'?" He shook his head. "Maybe you want to tell them, not me." "Dal's right, though," Tiger said. "We've got to contact them somehow. They aren't even responding to radio communication, and they've scrambled our outside radio and fouled our drive mechanism somehow. We've got to settle this while we still have an energy screen." There was a long silence as the three doctors looked at each other. Then Dal stood up and walked over to the swinging platform. He lifted Fuzzy down onto his shoulder. "It'll be all right," he said to Jack and Tiger. "I'll go out." "They'll tear you to ribbons," Tiger protested. Dal shook his head. "I don't think so," he said quietly. "I don't think they'll touch me. They'll greet me with open arms when I go down there, and they'll be eager to talk to me." "Are you crazy?" Jack cried, leaping to his feet. "We can't let you go out there." "Don't worry," Dal said. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'll be able to handle the situation, believe me." He hesitated a moment and gave Fuzzy a last nervous pat, settling him more firmly on his shoulder. Then he started down the corridor for the entrance lock. He had promised himself long before, many years before, that he would never do what he planned to do now, but now he knew that there was no alternative. The only other choice was to wait helplessly until the power failed and the protective screen vanished and the creatures on the ground outside tore the ship to pieces. As he stood in the airlock waiting for the pressure to shift to outside normal, he lifted Fuzzy down into the crook of his arm and rubbed the little creature between the shoe-button eyes. "You've got to back me up now," he whispered softly. "It's been a long time, I know that, but I need help now. It's going to be up to you." Dal knew the subtle strength of his people's peculiar talent. From the moment he had stepped down to the ground the second time with Tiger and Jack, even with Fuzzy waiting back on the ship, he had felt the powerful wave of horror and fear and anger rising up from the Bruckians, and he had glimpsed the awful idiot vacancy of the minds of the creatures in the enclosure, in whom the intelligent virus was already dead. This had required no effort. It just came naturally into his mind, and he had known instantly that something terrible had gone wrong. In the years on Hospital Earth, he had carefully forced himself never to think in terms of his special talent. He had diligently screened off the impressions and emotions that struck at him constantly from his classmates and from others that he came in contact with. Above all, he had fought down the temptation to turn his power the other way, to use it to his own advantage. But now, as the lock opened and he started down the ladder, he closed his mind to everything else. Hugging Fuzzy close to his side, he turned his mind into a single, tight channel. He drove the thought out at the Bruckians with all the power he could muster. "I come in peace. I mean you no harm. I have good news, joyful news. You must be happy to see me, eager to welcome me." He could feel the wave of anger and fear strike him like a physical blow as soon as he appeared in the entrance lock. The cries rose up in a wave, and the crowd surged in toward the ship. With the energy field released, there was nothing to stop them. They were tripping over each other to reach the bottom of the ladder first, shouting threats and waving angry fists, reaching up to grab at Dal's ankles as he came down. And then, as if by magic, the cries died in the throats of the ones closest to the ladder. The angry fists unclenched and extended into outstretched hands to help him down to the ground. As though an ever-widening wave was spreading out around him, the aura of peace and goodwill struck the people in the crowd. And as it spread, the anger faded from the faces, the hard lines gave way to puzzled frowns, then to smiles. Dal channeled his thoughts more rigidly and watched the effect spread out from him like ripples in a pond, as anger and suspicion and fear melted away to be replaced by confidence and trust. Dal had seen it occur 1,000 times before. He could remember his trips on Garvian trading ships with his father, when the traders with their fuzzy pink friends on their shoulders faced cold, hostile, suspicious buyers. It had seemed almost miraculous the way the suspicions melted away and the hostile faces became friendly as the buyers' minds became receptive to bargaining and trading. He had seen it happen on the Timgar with Tiger and Jack, and it was no coincidence that throughout the galaxy the Garvians, always accompanied by their fuzzy friends, had assumed the position of power and wealth and leadership that they had. And now, once again, the pattern was being repeated. The Bruckians who surrounded Dal were smiling and talking eagerly. They made no move to touch him or harm him. The spokesman they had talked to before was there at his elbow, and Dal heard himself saying, "We have found the answer to your problem. We know now the true nature of your race, and the nature of your intelligence. You were afraid that we would find out, but your fears were groundless. We will not turn our knowledge against you. We only want to help you." An expression almost like despair had crossed the spokesman's face as Dal spoke. "Now," he said, "it would be good if we could believe you. But how can we? We have been driven for so long and come so far, and now you would seek to wipe us out as parasites and disease carriers." Dal saw the Bruckian creature's eyes upon him, saw the frail body tremble and the lips move, but he knew now that the intelligence that formed the words and the thoughts behind them, the intelligence that made the lips speak the words, was the intelligence of a creature far different from the one he was looking at, a creature formed of billions of submicroscopic units, embedded in every one of the Bruckian's body cells, trapped there now and helpless against the antibody reaction that sought to destroy them. This was the intelligence that had called for help in its desperate plight, but had not quite dared to trust its rescuers with the whole truth. But was this strange virus creature good or evil, hostile or friendly? Dal's hand lay on Fuzzy's tiny body, but he felt no quiver, no vibration of fear. He looked across the face of the crowd, trying with all his strength to open his mind to the feelings and emotions of these people. Often enough, with Fuzzy nearby, he had felt the harsh impact of hostile, cruel, brutal minds, even when the owners of those minds had tried to conceal their feelings behind smiles and pleasant words. But here there was no sign of the sickening feeling that kind of mind produced, no hint of hostility or evil. He shook his head. "Why should we want to destroy you?" he said. "You are good and peaceful. We know that. Why should we harm you? All you want is a place to live and a host to join with you in a mutually valuable partnership. But you did not tell us everything you could about yourselves, and as a result, we have destroyed some of you in our clumsy attempts to learn your true nature." They talked then, and bit by bit the story came out. The life form was indeed a virus, unimaginably ancient, and intelligent throughout millions of years of its history. Driven by overpopulation, a pure culture of the virus creatures had long ago departed from their original native hosts and traveled like encapsulated spores across space from a distant galaxy. The trip had been long and exhausting. The virus creatures had retained only the minimum strength necessary to establish themselves in a new host, some unintelligent creature living on an uninhabited planet, a creature that could benefit by the great intelligence of the virus creatures and provide food and shelter for both. Finally, after thousands of years of searching, they had found this planet with its dull-minded, fruit-gathering inhabitants. These creatures had seemed perfect as hosts, and the virus creatures had thought their long search for a perfect partner was finally at an end. It was not until they had expended the last dregs of their energy in anchoring themselves into the cells and tissues of their new hosts that they discovered, to their horror, that the host creatures could not tolerate them. Unlike their original hosts, the bodies of these creatures began developing deadly antibodies that attacked the virus invaders. In their desperate attempts to hold on and fight back, the virus creatures had destroyed vital centers in the new hosts, and one by one they had begun to die. There was not enough energy left for the virus creatures to detach themselves and move on. Without some way to stem the onslaught of the antibodies, they were doomed to total destruction. "We were afraid to tell you doctors the truth," the spokesman said. "As we wandered and searched, we discovered that creatures like ourselves were extreme rarities in the universe, that most creatures similar to us were mindless, unintelligent parasites that struck down their hosts and destroyed them. Wherever we went, life forms of your kind regarded us as disease bearers, and their doctors taught them ways to destroy us. We had hoped that from you we might find a way to save ourselves. Then you unleashed on us the one weapon we could not fight." "But not maliciously," Dal said, "only because we did not understand. And now that we do, there may be a way to help. A difficult way, but at least a way. The antibodies themselves can be neutralized, but it may take our biochemists and virologists and all their equipment months or even years to develop and synthesize the proper antidote." The spokesman looked at Dal and turned away with a hopeless gesture. "Then it is too late after all," he said. "We are dying too fast. Even those of us who have not been affected so far are beginning to feel the early symptoms of the antibody attack." He smiled sadly and reached out to stroke the small pink creature on Dal's arm. "Your people too have a partner, I see. We envy you." Dal felt a movement on his arm and looked down at Fuzzy. He had always taken his little friend for granted, but now he thought of the feeling of emptiness and loss that had come across him when Fuzzy had been almost killed. He had often wondered just what Fuzzy might be like if his almost fluid, infinitely adaptable physical body had only been endowed with intelligence. He had wondered what kind of creature Fuzzy might be if he were able to use his remarkable structure with the guidance of an intelligent mind behind it. He felt another movement on his arm, and his eyes widened as he stared down at his little friend. A moment before, there had been a single 3-inch pink creature on his elbow, but now there were two, each just 1/2 the size of the original. As Dal watched, one of the two drew away from the other, creeping in to snuggle closer to Dal's side, and a pair of shoe-button eyes appeared and blinked up at him trustingly. But the other creature was moving down his arm, straining out toward the Bruckian spokesman. Dal realized instantly what was happening. He started to draw back, but something stopped him. Deep in his mind, he could sense a gentle voice reassuring him, saying, "It's all right. There is nothing to fear. No harm will come to me. These creatures need help, and this is the way to help them." He saw the Bruckian reach out a trembling hand. The tiny pink creature that had separated from Fuzzy seemed almost to leap across the outstretched hand, and then the spokesman held him close, and the new Fuzzy shivered happily. The virus creatures had found a host. Here was the ideal kind of body for their intelligence to work with and mold, a host where antibody formation could be perfectly controlled. Dal knew now that the problem had almost been solved once before, when the virus creature had reached Fuzzy on the ship. If they had only waited a little longer, they would have seen Fuzzy recover from his illness, a different creature entirely than before. Already, the new creature was dividing again, with half going on to the next of the Bruckians. To a submicroscopic virus, the body of the host would not have to be large. Soon, there would be a sufficient number of hosts to serve the virus creature's needs forever. As he started back up the ladder to the ship, Dal knew that the problem on 31 Brucker 7 had found a happy and permanent solution. Back in the control room, Dal related what had happened from beginning to end. There was only one detail that he concealed. He could not bring himself to tell Tiger and Jack of the true nature of his relationship with Fuzzy, of the odd power over the emotions of others that Fuzzy's presence gave him. He could tell by their faces that they realized that he was leaving something out. They had watched him go down to face a bloodthirsty mob, and had seen that mob become docile as lambs as though by magic. Clearly they could not understand what had happened, yet they did not ask him. "So it was Fuzzy's idea to volunteer as a new host for the creatures?" Jack said. Dal nodded. "I knew he could reproduce, of course," he said. "Every Garvian has a Fuzzy, and whenever a new Garvian is born, the father's Fuzzy always splits so that half can join the newborn child. It's like the division of a cell. Within hours, the Fuzzy that stayed down there will have divided to provide enough protoplasm for every one of the surviving intelligent Bruckians." "And your diagnosis was the right one," Jack said. "We'll see," Dal said. "Tomorrow we'll know better." But clearly the problem had been solved. The next day there was an excited conference between the spokesman and the doctors on the Lancet. The Bruckians had elected to maintain the same host body as before. They had gotten used to it, with the small pink creatures serving as a shelter to protect them against the deadly antibodies. They could live in peace and security. But they were eager, before the Lancet disembarked, to sign a full medical service contract with the doctors from Hospital Earth. A contract was signed, subject only to final acceptance and ratification by the Hospital Earth officials. Now that their radio was free again, the doctors jubilantly prepared a full account of the problem on 31 Brucker and its solution, and dispatched the news of the new contract to the first relay station on its way back to Hospital Earth. Then, weary to the point of collapse, they retired for the first good sleep in days, eagerly awaiting an official response from Hospital Earth on the completed case and the contract. "It ought to wipe out any black mark Dr. Tanner has against any of us," Jack said happily, "and especially in Dal's case." He grinned at the Red Doctor. "This one has been yours all the way. You pulled it out of the fire after I flubbed it completely, and you're going to get the credit if I have anything to say about it." "We should all get credit," Dal said. "A new contract isn't signed every day of the year, but the way we all fumbled our way into it, Hospital Earth shouldn't pay much attention to it anyway." But Dal knew that he was only throwing up his habitual shield to guard against disappointment. Traditionally, a new contract meant a star rating for each of the crew that brought it in. All through medical school, Dal had read the reports of other patrol ships that had secured new contracts with uncontacted planets, and he had seen the fanfare and honor that were heaped on the doctors from those ships. And for the first time since he had entered medical school years before, Dal now allowed himself to hope that his goal was in sight. He wanted to be a star surgeon more than anything else. It was the one thing that he had wanted and worked for since the cruel days when the plague had swept his homeland, destroying his mother and leaving his father an ailing cripple.
and since his assignment aboard the Lancet, one thought had filled his mind: to turn in the scarlet collar and cuff in return for the cape and silver star of the full-fledged physician in the Red Service of Surgery. Always before there had been the half-conscious dread that something would happen, that in the end, after all the work, the silver star would still remain just out of reach, that somehow he would never quite get it. But now there could be no question. Even Black Dr. Tanner could not deny a new contract. The crew of the Lancet would be called back to Hospital Earth for a full report on the newly contacted race, and their days as probationary doctors in the General Practice Patrol would be over. After they had slept themselves out, the doctors prepared the ship for launching and made their farewells to the Bruckian spokesman. "When the contract is ratified," Jack said, "a survey ship will come here. They will have all of the information that we have gathered, and they will spend many months gathering more. Tell them everything they want to know. Don't conceal anything, because once they have completed their survey, any General Practice Patrol ship in the galaxy will be able to answer a call for help and have the information they need to serve you." They delayed launching hour by hour, waiting for a response from Hospital Earth, but the radio was silent. They thought of a dozen reasons why the message might have been delayed, but the radio silence still continued. Finally, they strapped down and lifted the ship from the planet, still waiting for a response. When it finally came, there was no message of congratulations, nor even any acknowledgement of the new contract. Instead, there was only a terse message: "Proceed to reference point 43621, Section 19, and stand by for inspection party." Tiger took the message and read it in silence, then handed it to Dal. "What do they say?" Jack said. "Read it," Dal said. "They don't mention the contract, just an inspection party." "Inspection party? Is that the best they can do for us?" "They don't sound too enthusiastic," Tiger said. "At least you'd think they could acknowledge receipt of our report." "It's probably just part of the routine," Dal said. "Maybe they want to confirm our reports from our own records before they commit themselves." But he knew that he was only whistling in the dark. The moment he saw the terse message, he knew something had gone wrong with the contract. There would be no notes of congratulation, no returning in triumph and honor to Hospital Earth. Whatever the reason for the inspection party, Dal felt certain who the inspector was going to be. It had been exciting to dream, but the Scarlet Cape and the Silver Star were still a long way out of reach. End of Chapter 11. Chapter 12. The Showdown. It was hours later when their ship reached the contact point coordinates. There had been little talk during the transit. Each of them knew already what the other was thinking, and there wasn't much to be said. The message had said it for them. Dal's worst fears were realized when the inspection ship appeared, converting from Koenig Drive within a few miles of the Lancet. He had seen the ship before, a sleek, handsomely outfitted patrol-class ship with the insignia of the Black Service of Pathology emblazoned on its hull, the private ship of a 4-star Black Doctor. But none of them anticipated the action taken by the inspection ship as it drew within lifeboat range of the Lancet. A scooter shot away from its storage rack on the black ship, and a crew of black-garbed technicians piled into the Lancet's entrance lock, dressed in the special decontamination suits worn when a ship was returning from a plague spot into uninfected territory. "What is this?" Tiger demanded as the technicians started unloading decontamination gear into the lock. "What are you doing with that stuff?" The squad leader looked at him sourly. "You're in quarantine, Doc," he said. "Class 1, all precautions. Contact with unidentified pestilence. If you don't like it, argue with the Black Doctor. I've just got a job to do." He started shouting orders to his men, and they scattered throughout the ship with blowers and disinfectants, driving antiseptic sprays into every crack and cranny of the ship's interior, scouring the hull outside in the rigid pattern prescribed for plague ships. They herded the doctors into the decontamination lock, stripped them of their clothes, scrubbed them down, and tossed them special sterilized fatigues to wear with masks and gloves.
"This is idiotic," Jack protested. "We aren't carrying any dangerous organisms."
The squad leader shrugged indifferently. "Tell it to the Black Doctor, not me. All I know is that the ship is under quarantine until it's officially released, and from what I hear, it's not going to be released for quite some time." At last, the job was done, and the scooter departed back to the inspection ship. A few moments later, they saw it returning, this time carrying just 3 men. In addition to the pilot and 1 technician, there was a single passenger, a portly figure dressed in a black robe, horn-rimmed glasses, and a cowl. The scooter grappled the Lancet's side, and Black Dr. Hugo Tanner climbed wheezing into the entrance lock, followed by the technician. He stopped halfway into the lock to get his breath and paused again as the lock swung closed behind him. Dal was shocked at the physical change in the man in the few short weeks since he had seen him last. The Black Doctor's face was gray. Every effort of movement brought on paroxysms of coughing. He looked sick, and he looked tired, yet his jaw was still set in angry determination. The doctors stood at attention as he stepped into the control room, hardly able to conceal their surprise at seeing him.
"Well," the Black Doctor snapped at them, "what's the trouble with you? You act like you've seen a ghost or something."
We'd heard that you were in the hospital, sir."
"Did you now?" the Black Doctor snorted. "Hospital? Ah! I had to tell the press something to get the hounds off me for a while. These young puppies seem to think that a Black Doctor can just walk away from his duties any time he chooses to undergo their fancy surgical procedures. And you know who's been screaming the loudest to get their hands on me? The Red Service of Surgery, that's who."
The Black Doctor glared at Dal Timgar.
"Well, I dare say the Red Doctors will have their chance at me all in good time. But first there are certain things which must be taken care of."
He looked up at the attendant.
"You're quite certain that the ship has been decontaminated?"
The attendant nodded. "Yes, sir."
"And the crewmen?"
"It's safe to talk to them, sir, as long as you avoid physical contact." The Black Doctor grunted and wheezed and settled himself down in a seat.
"All right now, gentlemen," he said to the 3. "Let's have your story of this affair in the Brucker system right from the start."
"But we sent in a full report," Tiger said.
"I'm aware of that, you idiot. I have waded through your report, all 35 pages of it, and I only wish you hadn't been so long-winded. Now I want to hear what happened directly from you." "Well?"
The 3 doctors looked at each other. Then Jack began the story, starting with the first hesitant greeting that had come through to them. He told everything that had happened without embellishments. Their first analysis of the nature of the problem, the biochemical and medical survey that they ran on the afflicted people, his own failure to make the diagnosis, the incident of Fuzzy's sudden affliction, and the strange solution that had finally come from it. As he talked, the Black Doctor sat back with his eyes half closed, his face blank, listening and nodding from time to time as the story proceeded. And Jack was carefully honest and fair in his account.
"We were all of us lost until Dal Timgar saw the significance of what had happened to Fuzzy," he said. "His idea of putting the creature through the filter gave us our first specimen of the isolated virus, and showed us how to obtain the antibody. Then after we saw what happened with our initial series of injections, we were really at sea, and by then we couldn't reach a hospital ship for help of any kind."
He went on to relate Dal's idea that the virus itself might be the intelligent creature, and recounted the things that happened after Dal went down to talk to the spokesman again with Fuzzy on his shoulder. Through it all, the Black Doctor listened sourly, glancing occasionally at Dal and saying nothing.
"So is that all?"
he said when Jack had finished.
"Not quite," Jack said. "I want it to be on the record that it was my failure in diagnosis that got us into trouble. I don't want any misunderstanding about that. If I'd had the wit to think beyond the end of my nose, there wouldn't have been any problem."
I see, the Black Doctor said. He pointed to Dal. So it was this one who really came up with the answers and directed the whole program on this problem. Is that right? That's right, Jack said firmly. He should get all the credit. Something stirred in Dal's mind, and he felt Fuzzy snuggling in tightly to his side. He could feel the cold hostility in the Black Doctor's mind, and he started to say something, but the Black Doctor cut him off. "Do you agree to that also, Dr. Martin?" he asked Tiger. "I certainly do," Tiger said. "I'll back up the Blue Doctor right down the line." The Black Doctor smiled unpleasantly and nodded. "Well, I'm certainly happy to hear you say that, gentlemen. I might say that it is a very great relief to me to hear it from your own testimony, because this time there shouldn't be any argument from either of you as to just where the responsibility lies, and I'm relieved to know that I can completely exonerate you two at any rate." Jack Alvarez's jaw went slack, and he stared at the Black Doctor as though he hadn't heard him properly. "Exonerate us?" he said. "Exonerate us from what?" "From the charges of incompetence, malpractice, and conduct unbecoming to a physician which I am lodging against your colleague in the Red Service here," the Black Doctor said angrily. "Of course, I was confident that neither of you two could have contributed very much to this bungling mess, but it is reassuring to have your own statements of the fact on the record. They should carry more weight in a council hearing than any plea I might make in your behalf." But what do you mean by a council hearing?" Tiger stammered. "I don't understand you. This problem is solved. We solved it as a patrol team, all of us. We sent in a brand new medical service contract for these people." "Oh yes, that." The Black Doctor drew a long pink dispatch sheet from an inner pocket and opened it out. The doctors could see the photo reproductions of their signatures at the bottom. "Fortunately for you two, this bit of nonsense was brought to my attention at the first relay station that received it. I personally accepted it and withdrew it from the circuit before it could reach Hospital Earth for filing." Slowly, as they watched him, he ripped the pink dispatch sheet into a dozen pieces and tossed it into the disposal vent. "So much for that," he said slowly. "I can choose to overlook your foolishness in trying to cloud the important issues with a so-called contract to divert attention, but I'm afraid I can't pay much attention to it nor allow it to appear in the general report. And of course, I am forced to classify the Lancet as a plague ship until a bacteriological and virological examination has been completed on both ship and crew. The planet itself will be considered a galactic plague spot until proper measures have been taken to ensure its decontamination." The Black Doctor drew some papers from another pocket and turned to Dal Timgar. "As for you, the charges are clear enough. You have broken the most fundamental rules of good judgment and good medicine in handling the 31 Brucker affair. You have permitted a general practice patrol ship to approach a potentially dangerous plague spot without any notification of higher authorities. You have undertaken a biochemical and medical survey for which you had neither the proper equipment nor the training qualifications, and you exposed your ship and your crewmates to an incredible risk in landing on such a planet. You are responsible for untold, possibly fatal, damage to over 200 individuals of the race that called on you for help. You have even subjected the creature that depends upon your own race for its life and support to virtual slavery and possible destruction. And finally, you have the audacity to try to cover up your bungling with claims of arranging a medical service contract with an uninvestigated race." The Black Doctor broke off as an attendant came in the door and whispered something in his ear. Dr. Tanner shook his head angrily. "I can't be bothered now." "They say it's urgent, sir." "Yes, it's always urgent." The Black Doctor heaved to his feet. "If it weren't for this miserable incompetent here, I wouldn't have to be taking precious time away from my more important duties." He scowled at the Lancet crewman. "You will excuse me for a moment?" he said, and disappeared into the communications room. The moment he was gone from the room, Jack and Tiger were talking at once. "He couldn't really be serious," Tiger said. "It's impossible. Not one of those charges would hold up under investigation." "Well, I think it's a frame-up," Jack said, his voice tight with anger. I knew that some people on Hospital Earth were out to get you, but I don't see how a 4-star Black Doctor could be a party to such a thing. Either someone has been misinforming him, or he just doesn't understand what happened." Dal shook his head. "He understands all right, and he's the one who's determined to get me out of medicine. This is a flimsy excuse, but he has to use it because it's now or never. He knows that if we bring in a contract with a new planet and it's formally ratified, we'll all get our stars and he'd never be able to block me again. And Black Dr. Tanner is going to be certain that I don't get that star, or die trying." "But this is completely unfair," Jack protested. "He's turning our own words against you. You can bet that he'll have a survey crew down on that planet in no time, bringing home a contract just the same as the one we wrote, and there won't be any questions asked about it." "Except that I'll be out of the service," Dal said. "Don't worry, you'll get the credit in the long run. When all the dust settles, he'll be sure that you two are named as agents for the contract. He doesn't want to hurt you, it's me that he's out to get." "Well, he won't get away with it," Tiger said. "We can see to that. It's not too late to retract our stories. If he thinks he can get rid of you with something that wasn't your fault, he's going to find out that he has to get rid of a lot more than just you." But Dal was shaking his head. "Not this time, Tiger. This time you keep out of it." "What do you mean, keep out of it?" Tiger cried. "Do you think I'm going to stand by quietly and watch him cut you down?" "That's exactly what you're going to do," Dal said sharply. "I meant what I said. I want you to keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything more at all. Just let it be." "But I can't stand by and do nothing. When a friend of mine needs help, can't you get it through your thick skull that this time I don't want your help?" Dal said. "Do me a favor this time. Leave me alone. Don't stick your thumb in the pie." Tiger just stared at the little Garvian. "Look, Dal, all I'm trying to do—" "I know what you're trying to do," Dal snapped. "And I don't want any part of it. I don't need your help. I don't want it. Why do you have to force it down my throat?" There was a long silence, then Tiger spread his hands helplessly. "Okay," he said. "If that's the way you want it." He turned away from Dal, his big shoulders slumping. "I've only been trying to make up for some of the dirty breaks you've been handed since you came to Hospital Earth." "I know that," Dal said, "and I've appreciated it. Sometimes it's been the only thing that keeps me going. But that doesn't mean that you own me. Friendship is one thing, proprietorship is something else. I'm not your private property." He saw the look on Tiger's face, as though he had suddenly turned and slapped him viciously across the face. "Look, I know it sounds awful, but I can't help it. I don't want to hurt you, and I don't want to change things with us, but I'm a person just like you are. I can't go on leaning on you any longer. Everybody has to stand on his own somewhere along the line. You do, and I do too. And that goes for Jack, too." They heard the door to the communications shack open, and the Black Doctor was back in the room. "Well," he said, "am I interrupting something?" He glanced sharply at the tight-lipped doctors. "The call was from the survey section," he went on blandly. "A survey crew is on its way to 31 Brucker to start gathering some useful information on the situation, but that is neither here nor there. You have heard the charges against the Red Doctor here. Is there anything any of you want to say?" Tiger and Jack looked at each other. The silence in the room was profound. The Black Doctor turned to Dal. "And what about you?" "I have something to say, but I'd like to talk to you alone." "As you wish. You two will return to your quarters and stay there." "The attendant, too," Dal said. The Black Doctor's eyes glinted and met Dal's for a moment. Then he shrugged and nodded to his attendant. "Step outside, please. We have a private matter to discuss." The Black Doctor turned his attention to the papers on the desk as Dal stood before him with Fuzzy sitting in the crook of his arm. From the moment that the notice of the inspection ship's approach had come to the Lancet, Dal had known what was coming. He had been certain what the purpose of the detainment was, and who the inspector would be, yet he had not really been worried. In the back of his mind, a small, comfortable thought had been sustaining him. It didn't really matter how hostile or angry Black Dr. Tanner might be. He knew that in a last-ditch stand, there was one way the Black Doctor could be handled. He remembered the dramatic shift from hostility to friendliness among the Bruckians when he had come down from the ship, with Fuzzy on his shoulder. Before then, he had never considered using his curious power to protect himself and gain an end, but since then, without even consciously bringing it to mind, he had known that the next time would be easier. If it ever came to a showdown with Black Dr. Tanner, a trap from which he couldn't free himself, there was still this way. The Black Doctor would never know what happened, he thought. It would just seem to him, suddenly, that he had been looking at things the wrong way. No one would ever know. But he knew, even as the thought came to mind, that this was not so. Now, face to face with the showdown, he knew that it was no good. One person would know what had happened. Himself. On 31 Brucker, he had convinced himself that the end justified the means. Here it was different. For a moment, as Black Dr. Tanner stared up at him through the horn-rimmed glasses, Dal wavered. Why should he hesitate to protect himself, he thought angrily. This attack against him was false and unfair, trumped up for the sole purpose of destroying his hopes and driving him out of the service. Why shouldn't he grasp at any means, fair or unfair, to fight it? But he could hear the echo of Black Dr. Arnquist's words in his mind. I beg of you not to use it. No matter what happens, don't use it. Of course, Dr. Arnquist would never know for sure that he had broken faith, but he would know. Well, Black Dr. Tanner was saying, speak up. I can't waste much more time dealing with you. If you have something to say, say it. Dal sighed. He lifted Fuzzy down and slipped him gently into his jacket pocket. These charges against me are not true, he said. The Black Doctor shrugged. Your own crewmates support them with their statements. That's not the point. They're not true, and you know it as well as I do. You've deliberately rigged them up to build a case against me. The Black Doctor's face turned dark, and his hands clenched on the papers on the desk. Are you suggesting that I have nothing better to do than to rig false charges against one probationer out of 75,000 traveling the galaxy? I'm suggesting that we are alone here, Dal said. Nobody else is listening. Just for once, right now, we can be honest. We both know what you're trying to do to me. I'd just like to hear you admit it once. The Black Doctor slammed his fist down on the table. I don't have to listen to insolence like this, he roared. Yes, you do, Dal said. Just this once, then I'll be through. Suddenly Dal's words were tumbling out of control, and his whole body was trembling with anger. You have been determined from the very beginning that I should never finish the medical training that I started. You've tried to block me time after time, in every way you could think of. You've almost succeeded, but never quite made it until this time. But you know you have to make it. If that contract were to go through, I'd get my star, and you'd never again be able to do anything about it. So it's now or never if you're going to break me. Nonsense, the Black Doctor stormed. I wouldn't lower myself to meddle with your kind. The charges speak for themselves. Not if you look at them carefully. You claim I failed to notify Hospital Earth that we had entered a plague area. But our records of our contact with the planet prove that we did only what any patrol ship would have done when the call came in. We didn't have enough information to know that there was a plague there. And when we finally did know the truth, we could no longer make contact with Hospital Earth. You claim that I brought harm to 200 of the natives there. Yet if you study our notes and records, you will see that our errors there were unavoidable. We couldn't have done anything else under the circumstances, and if we hadn't done what we did, we would have been ignoring the basic principles of diagnosis and treatment which we've been taught. And your charges don't mention that by possibly harming 200 of the Bruckians, we found a way to save 2 million of them from absolute destruction. The Black Doctor glared at him. The charges will stand up, I'll see to that. Oh, I'm sure you will. You can ram them through and make them stick before anybody ever has a chance to examine them carefully. You have the power to do it, and by the time an impartial judge could review all the records, your survey ship will have been there and gathered so much more data and muddied up the field so thoroughly that no one will ever be certain that the charges aren't true.
But you and I know that they wouldn't really hold up under inspection. We know that they're false right down the line, and you're the one who is responsible for them." The Black Doctor grew darker, and he trembled with rage as he drew himself to his feet. Dal could feel his hatred almost like a physical blow, and his voice was almost a shriek. "All right," he said. "If you insist, then the charges are lies, made up specifically to break you, and I'm going to push them through if I have to jeopardize my reputation to do it. You could have bowed out gracefully at any time along the way and saved yourself dishonor and disgrace, but you wouldn't do it. Now I'm going to force you to. I've worked my lifetime long to build the reputation of Hospital Earth and of the Earthmen that go out to all the planets as representatives. I've worked to make the Confederation respect Hospital Earth and the Earthmen who are her doctors. You don't belong here with us. You forced yourself in. You aren't an Earthman, and you don't have the means or resources to be a doctor from Hospital Earth. If you succeeded, 1,000 others will follow in your footsteps, chipping away at the reputation that we have worked to build. And I'm not going to allow one incompetent alien bungler pretending to be a surgeon to walk in and destroy the thing that I have fought to build." The Black Doctor's voice had grown shrill, almost out of control. But now, suddenly, he broke off, his mouth still working, and his face went deathly white. The finger he was pointing at Dal wavered and fell. He clutched at his chest, his breath coming in great gasps, and staggered back into the chair. "Something's happened," his voice croaked. "I can't breathe." Dal stared at him in horror for a moment, then leaped across the room and jammed his thumb against the alarm bell. End of Chapter 12. Chapter 13, The Trial. Red Dr. Dal Timgar knew at once that there would be no problem in diagnosis here. The Black Doctor slumped back in his seat, gasping for air, his face twisted in pain as he labored just to keep on breathing. Tiger and Jack burst into the room, and Dal could tell that they knew instantly what had happened. "Coronary," Jack said grimly. Dal nodded. "The question is just how bad." "Get the cardiograph in here. We'll soon see." But the electrocardiograph was not needed to diagnose the nature of the trouble. All three doctors had seen the picture often enough. The sudden massive blockage of circulation to the heart that was so common to creatures with central circulatory pumps, the sort of catastrophic accident which could cause irreparable crippling or sudden death within a matter of minutes. Tiger injected some medicine to ease the pain, and started oxygen to help the labored breathing, but the old man's color did not improve. He was too weak to talk. He just lay helplessly gasping for air as they lifted him up onto a bed. Then Jack took an electrocardiograph tracing and shook his head. "We'd better get word back to Hospital Earth, and fast," he said quietly. "He just waited a little too long for the cardiac transplant, that's all. This is a bad one. Tell them we need a surgeon out here just as fast as they can move, or the Black Service is going to have a dead physician on its hands." There was a sound across the room, and the Black Doctor motioned feebly to Tiger. "The cardiogram," he gasped. "Let me see it." "There's nothing for you to see," Tiger said. "You mustn't do anything to excite yourself." "Let me see it." Dr. Tanner took the thin strip of paper and ran it quickly through his fingers. Then he dropped it on the bed and lay his head back hopelessly. "Too late," he said so softly they could hardly hear him. "Too late for help now." Tiger checked his blood pressure and listened to his heart. "It will only take a few hours to get help," he said. "You rest and sleep now. There's plenty of time." He joined Dal and Jack in the corridor. "I'm afraid he's right this time," he said. "The damage is severe, and he hasn't the strength to hold out very long. He might last long enough for a surgeon and operating team to get here, but I doubt it. We'd better get the word off." A few moments later, he put the earphones aside. "It'll take 6 hours for the nearest help to get here," he said. "Maybe 5.5 if they really crowd it, but when they get a look at that cardiogram on the screen, they'll just throw up their hands. He's got to have a transplant, nothing else. And even if we can keep him alive until the surgical team gets here, the odds are 1,000 to 1 against his surviving the surgery." "Well, he's been asking for it," Jack said. "They've been trying to get him into the hospital for a cardiac transplant for years. Everybody's known that one of these towering rages would get him sooner or later." "Maybe he'll hold on better than we think," Dal said. "Let's watch and wait." But the Black Doctor was not doing well. Moment by moment he grew weaker, laboring harder for air as his blood pressure crept slowly down. Half an hour later, the pain returned. Tiger took another tracing while Dal checked his venous blood pressure and shock level. As he finished, Dal felt the Black Doctor's eyes on him. "It's going to be all right," he said. "There'll be time for help to come." Feebly, the Black Doctor shook his head.
"No time," he said. "Can't wait that long."
Dal could see the fear in the old man's eyes. His lips began to move again as though there were something more he wanted to say, but then his face hardened and he turned his head away helplessly. Dal walked around the bed and looked down at the tracing, comparing it with the first one that was taken. "What do you think, Tiger?" "It's no good. He'll never make it for 5 more hours." "What about right now?" Tiger shook his head. "It's a terrible surgical risk, but every minute of waiting makes it worse, right?" "That's right." "Then I think we'll stop waiting," Dal said. "We have a prosthetic heart in condition for use, don't we?" "Of course." "Good. Get it ready now." It seemed as though someone else were talking. "You'll have to be first assistant, Tiger. We'll get him onto the heart-lung machine, and if we don't have help available by then, we'll have to try to complete the transplant. Jack, you'll give anesthesia, and it will be a tricky job. Try to use the local blocks as much as you can, and have the heart-lung machine ready well in advance. We'll only have a few seconds to make the shift. Now, let's get moving." Tiger stared at him. "Are you sure that you want to do this?" "I never wanted anything less in my life," Dal said fervently. "But do you think he can survive until the hospital ship arrives?" "No." "Then it seems to me that I don't have any choice. You two don't need to worry. This is a surgical problem now, and I'll take full responsibility." The Black Doctor was watching him, and Dal knew he had heard the conversation. Now the old man lay helplessly as they moved about, getting the surgical room into preparation. Jack prepared the anesthetics, checked and rechecked the complex heart-lung machine, which could artificially support circulation and respiration at the time that the damaged heart was separated from its great vessels. The transplant prosthetic heart had been grown in the laboratories on Hospital Earth from embryonic tissue. Tiger removed it from the frozen specimen locker and brought it to normal body temperature in the special warm saline bath designed for the purpose. Throughout the preparations, the Black Doctor lay watching, still conscious enough to recognize what was going on, attempting from time to time to shake his head in protest, but not quite succeeding. Finally, Dal came to the bedside. "Don't be afraid," he said gently to the old man. "It isn't safe to try to delay until the ship from Hospital Earth can get here. Every minute we wait is counting against you. I think I can manage the transplant if I start now. I know you don't like it, but I am the Red Doctor in authority on this ship. If I have to order you, I will." The Black Doctor lay silent for a moment, staring at Dal. Then the fear seemed to fade from his face, and the anger disappeared. With a great effort, he moved his head to nod.
"All right, son," he said softly. "Do the best you know how."
Dal knew from the moment he made the decision to go ahead that the thing he was undertaking was all but hopeless. There was little or no talk as the 3 doctors worked at the operating table. The overhead light in the ship's tiny surgery glowed brightly. The only sound in the room was the wheeze of the anesthesia apparatus, the snap of clamps, and the doctor's own quiet breathing as they worked desperately against time. Dal felt as if he were in a dream, working like an automaton, going through the mechanical motions that seemed completely unrelated to the living patient that lay on the operating table. In his training, he had assisted at hundreds of organ transplant operations. He himself had done dozens of cardiac transplants, with experienced surgeons assisting and guiding him until the steps of the procedure had become almost second nature. On Hospital Earth, with the unparalleled medical facilities available there, and with well-trained teams of doctors, anesthetists, and nurses, the technique of replacing an old, worn-out, damaged heart with a new and healthy one had become commonplace. It posed no more threat to a patient than a simple appendectomy had posed 3 centuries before. But here in the patrol ship's operating room, under emergency conditions, there seemed little hope of success. Already the Black Doctor had suffered violent shock from the damage that had occurred in his heart. Already he was clinging to life by a fragile thread. The additional shock of the surgery, of the anesthesia, and the necessary conversion to the heart-lung machine, while the delicate tissue of the new heart were fitted and sutured into place, vessel by vessel, was more than any patient could be expected to survive. Yet Dal had known when he saw the second cardiogram that the attempt would have to be made. Now he worked swiftly, his frail body engulfed in the voluminous surgical gown, his thin fingers working carefully with the polished instruments. Speed and skill were all that could save the Black Doctor now, to offer him the 1 chance in 1,000 that he had for survival. But the speed and skill had to be Dal's. Dal knew it, and the knowledge was like a lead weight strapped to his shoulders. If Black Dr. Hugo Tanner was fighting for his life now, Dal knew that he too was fighting for his life, the only kind of life that he wanted, the life of a physician. Black Dr. Tanner's antagonism to him as an alien, as an incompetent, as one who was unworthy to wear the collar and cuff of a physician from Hospital Earth, was common knowledge. Dal realized with perfect clarity that if he failed now, his career as a physician would be over. No one, not even himself, would ever be entirely certain that he had not somehow, in some dim corner of his mind, allowed himself to fail. Yet if he had not made the attempt, and the Black Doctor had died before help had come, there would always be those who would accuse him of delaying on purpose. His mouth was dry. He longed for a drink of water, even though he knew that no water could quench this kind of thirst. His fingers grew numb as he worked, and moment by moment the sense of utter hopelessness grew stronger in his mind. Tiger worked stolidly across the table from him, inexpert help at best because of the sketchy surgical training he had had. Even his solid presence and support here did not lighten the burden for Dal. There was nothing that Tiger could do or say that would help things or change things now. Even Fuzzy, waiting alone on his perch in the control room, could not help now. Nothing could help now but his own individual skill as a surgeon and his bitter determination that he must not and would not fail. But his fingers faltered as 1,000 questions welled up in his mind. Was he doing this right? This vessel here, clamp it and tie it? Or dissect it out and try to preserve it? This nerve plexus, which one is it? How important? How are the blood pressure and respirations doing? Was the Black Doctor holding his own under the assault of surgery? The more Dal tried to hurry, the more he seemed to be wading through waist-deep mud, unable to make his fingers do what he wanted them to do. How could he save 10 seconds, 20 seconds, half a minute? That half a minute might make the difference between success or failure, yet the seconds ticked by swiftly, and the procedure was going slowly. Too slowly. He reached a point where he thought he could not go on. His mind was searching desperately for help, any kind of help, something to lean on, something to brace him and give him support. And then, quite suddenly, he understood something clearly that had been nibbling at the corners of his mind for a long time. It was as if someone had snapped on a floodlight in a darkened room, and he saw something he had never seen before. He saw that from the first day he had stepped down from the Garvian ship that had brought him to Hospital Earth to begin his medical training, he had been relying upon crutches to help him. Black Dr. Arnquist had been a crutch upon whom he could lean. Tiger, for all his clumsy good-heartedness and for all the help and protection he had offered, had been a crutch. Fuzzy, who had been by his side since the day he was born, was still another kind of crutch to fall back on, a way out, a port of haven in the storm. They were crutches, every one, and he had leaned on them heavily. But now there was no crutch to lean on. He had a quick mind with good training. He had 2 nimble hands that knew their job, and 2 legs that were capable of supporting his weight, frail as they were. He knew now that he had to stand on them squarely, for the first time in his life. And suddenly, He realized that this was as it should be. It seemed so clear, so obvious and unmistakable that he wondered how he could have failed to recognize it for so long. If he could not depend on himself, then Black Dr. Hugo Tanner would have been right all along. If he could not do this job that was before him on his own strength, standing on his own two legs without crutches to lean on, how could he claim to be a competent physician? What right did he have to the goal he sought if he had to earn it on the strength of the help of others? It was he who wanted to be a star surgeon, not Fuzzy, not Tiger, nor anyone else. He felt his heart thudding in his chest, and he saw the operation before him as if he were standing in an amphitheater, peering down over some other surgeon's shoulder. Suddenly, everything else was gone from his mind but the immediate task at hand. His fingers began to move more swiftly, with a confidence he had never felt before. The decisions to be made arose, and he made them without hesitation, and he knew as he made them that they were right. And for the first time, the procedure began to move. He murmured instructions to Jack from time to time, and placed Tiger's clumsy hands in the places he wanted them for retraction. "Not there, back a little," he said. "That's right. Now hold this clamp and release it slowly while I tie, then re-clamp it. Slowly now. That's the way. Jack, check that pressure again." It seemed as though someone else were doing the surgery, directing his hands step by step in the critical work that had to be done. Dal placed the connections to the heart-lung machine perfectly, and moved with new swiftness and confidence as the great blood vessels were clamped off and the damaged heart removed. A quick check of vital signs, chemistries, oxygenation, a sharp instruction to Jack, a caution to Tiger, and the new prosthetic heart was in place. He worked now with painstaking care, manipulating the microsutures that would secure the new vessels to the old so firmly that they were almost indistinguishable from a healed wound. And he knew that it was going right now, that whether the patient ultimately survived or not, he had made the right decision and had carried it through with all the skill at his command. And then the heart-lung machine fell silent again, and the carefully applied nodal stimulator flicked on and off, and slowly, at first hesitantly, then firmly and vigorously, the new heart began its endless pumping chore. The Black Doctor's blood pressure moved up to a healthy level and stabilized. The gray flesh of his face slowly became suffused with healthy pink. It was over, and Dal was walking out of the surgery, his hands trembling so violently that he could hardly get his gown off. He wanted to laugh and cry at the same time, and he could see the silent pride in the others' faces as they joined him in the dressing room to change clothes. He knew then that no matter what happened, he had vindicated himself. Half an hour later, back in the sick bay, the Black Doctor was awake, breathing slowly and easily without need of supplemental oxygen. Only the fine sweat standing out on his forehead gave indication of the ordeal he had been through. Swiftly and clinically, Dal checked the vital signs as the old man watched him. He was about to turn the pressure cuff over to Jack and leave when the Black Doctor said, "Wait." Dal turned to him. "Yes, sir?" "You did it," the Black Doctor said softly. "Yes, sir." "It's finished? The transplant is done?" "Yes," Dal said. "It went well, and you can rest now. You were a good patient." For the first time, Dal saw a smile cross the old man's face. "A foolish patient, perhaps," he said so softly that no one but Dal could hear. "But not so foolish now, not so foolish that I cannot recognize a good doctor when I see one." And with a smile, he closed his eyes and went to sleep. End of Chapter 13. Chapter 14, Star Surgeon. It was amazing to Dal Timgar just how good it seemed to be back on Hospital Earth again. In the time he had been away as crewman of the Lancet, the seasons had changed, and the port of Philadelphia lay under the steaming summer sun. As Dal stepped off the shuttle ship to join the hurrying crowds in the great spaceport, it seemed almost as though he were coming home. He thought for a moment of the night not so long before, when he had waited here for the shuttle to Hospital Seattle to attend the meeting of the Medical Training Council. He had worn no uniform then, not even the collar and cuff of the probationary physician, and he remembered his despair that night when he had thought that his career as a physician from Hospital Earth was at an end. Now he was returning by shuttle from Hospital Seattle to the port of Philadelphia again, completing the cycle that had been started many months before. But things were different now. The scarlet cape of the Red Service of Surgery hung from his slender shoulders now, and the light of the station room caught the polished silver emblem on his collar. It was a tiny bit of metal, but its significance was enormous. It announced to the world Dal Timgar's final and permanent acceptance as a physician, but more, it symbolized the far-reaching distances he had already traveled, and would travel again, in the service of Hospital Earth. It was the silver star of the Star Surgeon. The week just past had been both exciting and confusing. The hospital ship had arrived 5 hours after Black Dr. Hugo Tanner had recovered from his anesthesia, moving in on the Lancet in frantic haste, and starting the shipment of special surgical supplies, anesthetics, and maintenance equipment across in lifeboats almost before contact had been stabilized. A large passenger boat hurtled away from the hospital ship's side, carrying a pair of 4-star surgeons, half a dozen 3-star surgeons, 2 radiologists, 2 internists, a dozen nurses, and another 4-star black doctor across to the Lancet. And when they arrived at the patrol ship's entrance lock, they discovered that their haste had been in vain. It was like grand rounds in the general wards of Hospital Philadelphia, with the 4-star surgeons in the lead as they tramped aboard the patrol ship. They found Black Dr. Tanner sitting quietly at his bedside, reading a journal of pathology and taking notes. He glared up at them when they burst in the door without even knocking. "But are you feeling well, sir?" the chief surgeon asked him for the 3rd time.
"Of course I'm feeling well. Do you think I'd be sitting here if I weren't?" the Black Doctor growled. "Dr. Timgar is my surgeon and the physician in charge of this case. Talk to him. He can give you all the details of the matter."
"You mean you permitted a probationary physician to perform this kind of surgery?" the 4-star surgeon cried incredulously.
"I did not," the Black Doctor snapped. "He had to drag me kicking and screaming into the operating room. But fortunately for me, this particular probationary physician had the courage of his convictions, as well as wit enough to realize that I would not survive if he waited for you to gather your army together. But I think you will find the surgery was handled with excellent skill. Again, I must refer you to Dr. Timgar for the details. I was not paying attention to the technique of the surgery, I assure you."
"But, sir," the chief surgeon broke in, "how could there have been surgery of any sort here? The dispatch that came to us listed the Lancet as a plague ship."
"Plague ship?" the Black Doctor exploded. "Oh, I imagine that the dispatcher must have gotten his signals mixed somehow. Well, I suppose you want to examine me. Let's have it over with."
The doctors examined him within an inch of his life. They exhausted every means of physical, laboratory, and radiological examination short of reopening his chest and looking in. And at last the chief surgeon was forced reluctantly to admit that there was nothing left for him to do but provide post-operative follow-up care for the irascible old man. And by the time the examination was over and the Black Doctor was moved aboard the hospital ship, word had come through official channels to the Lancet announcing that the quarantine order had been a dispatcher's unfortunate error, and directing the ship to return at once to Hospital Earth with the new contract that had been signed on 31 Brucker 7. The crewmen of the Lancet had special orders to report immediately to the Medical Training Council at Hospital Seattle upon arrival, in order to give their formal general practice patrol reports, and to receive their appointments, respectively, as Star Physician, Star Diagnostician, and Star Surgeon. The orders were signed with the personal mark of Hugo Tanner, physician of the Black Service of Pathology. Now, the ceremony and celebration in Hospital Seattle were over, and Dal had another appointment to keep. He lifted Fuzzy from his elbow and tucked him safely into an inner jacket pocket to protect him from the crowd in the station, and moved swiftly through to the subway tubes. He had expected to see Black Dr. Arnquist at the investment ceremonies, but there had been neither sign nor word from him. Dal tried to reach him after the ceremonies were over. All he could learn was that the Black Doctor was unavailable. And then a message had come through to Dal under the official Hospital Earth headquarters priority, requesting him to present himself at once at the Grand Council building at Hospital Philadelphia for an interview of the utmost importance. He followed the directions on the dispatch now, and reached the Grand Council building well ahead of the appointed time. He followed corridors and rode elevators until he reached the 22nd story office suite where he had been directed to report. The whole building seemed alive with bustle, as though something of enormous importance was going on. High-ranking physicians of all the services were hurrying about, gathering in little groups at the elevators and talking among themselves in hushed voices. Even more strange, Dal saw delegation after delegation of alien creatures moving through the building, some in the special atmosphere-maintaining devices necessary for their survival on Earth, some characteristically alone and unaccompanied, others in the company of great retinues of underlings. Dal paused in the main concourse of the building as he saw 2 such delegations arrive by special car from the port of Philadelphia. "Odd," he said quietly, reaching in to stroke Fuzzy's head. "Quite a gathering of the clans, eh? What do you think? Last time I saw a gathering like this was back at home during one of the centennial conclaves of the Galactic Confederation." On the 22nd floor, a secretary ushered him into an inner office. There, he found Black Dr. Thorvald Arnquist in busy conference with a blue doctor, a green doctor, and a surgeon. The Black Doctor looked up and beamed. "That will be all right now, gentlemen," he said. "I'll be in touch with you directly." He waited until the others had departed. Then he crossed the room and practically hugged Dal in delight. "It's good to see you, boy," he said. "And above all, it's good to see that silver star at last. You and your little pink friend have done a good job. A far better job than I thought you would do, I must admit." Dal perched Fuzzy on his shoulder. "But what is this about an interview? Why did you want to see me, and what are all these people doing here?" Dr. Arnquist laughed. "Don't worry," he said. "You won't have to stay for the council meeting. It will be a long, boring session, I fear. Doubtless every single one of these delegates at some time in the next few days will be standing up to give us a 3-hour oration, and it is my ill fortune, as a 4-star Black Doctor, to have to sit and listen and smile through it all. But in the end, it will be worth it, and I thought that you should at least know that your name will be mentioned many times during these sessions." "My name? You didn't know that you were a guinea pig, did you?" the Black Doctor said. I'm afraid I didn't." "An unwitting tool, so to speak," the Black Doctor chuckled. "You know, of course, that the Galactic Confederation has been delaying and stalling any action on Hospital Earth's application for full status as one of the Confederation powers and for a seat on the Council. We had fulfilled 2 criteria for admission without difficulty. We had resolved our problems at home so that we were free from war on our own planet, and we had a talent that is much needed and badly in demand in the galaxy, a job to do that would fit into the Confederation's organization. But the Confederation has always had a 3rd criterion for its membership, a criterion that Hospital Earth could not so easily prove or demonstrate." The Black Doctor smiled. "After all, there could be no place in a true Confederation of Worlds for any one race of people that considered itself superior to all the rest. No race can be admitted to the Confederation until its members have demonstrated that they are capable of tolerance, willing to accept the members of other races on an equal footing. And it has always been the nature of Earthmen to be intolerant, to assume that one who looks strange and behaves differently must somehow be inferior. The Black Doctor crossed the room and opened a folder on the desk. You can read the details some other time if you like. You were selected by the Galactic Confederation from 1,000 possible applicants to serve as a test case, to see if a place could be made for you on Hospital Earth. No one here was told of your position, not even you, although certain of us suspected the truth. The Confederation wanted to see if a well-qualified, likable, and intelligent creature from another world would be accepted and elevated to equal rank as a physician with Earthmen. Dal stared at him. And I was the one? You were the one. It was a struggle, all right, but Hospital Earth has finally satisfied the Confederation. At the end of this conclave, we will be admitted to full membership and given a permanent seat and vote in the Galactic Council. Our probationary period will be over. But enough of that. What about you? What are your plans? What do you propose to do now that you have that star on your collar? They talked then about the future. Tiger Martin had been appointed to the survey crew returning to 31 Brucker 7 at his own request, while Jack was accepting a temporary teaching post in the Great Diagnostic Clinic at Hospital Philadelphia. There were a dozen things that Dal had considered, but for the moment he wanted only to travel from medical center to medical center on Hospital Earth, observing and studying in order to decide how he would best like to use his abilities and his position as a physician from Hospital Earth. It will be in surgery, of course, he said. Just where in surgery, or what kind, I don't know just yet. But there will be time enough to decide that. Then go along, Dr. Arnquist said, with my congratulations and blessing. You have taught us a great deal, and perhaps you have learned some things at the same time. Dal hesitated for a moment, then he nodded. I've learned some things, he said, but there's still one thing that I want to do before I go. He lifted his little pink friend gently down from his shoulder and rested him in the crook of his arm. Fuzzy looked up at him, blinking his shoe-button eyes happily. You asked me once to leave Fuzzy with you, and I refused. I couldn't see then how I could possibly do without him. Even the thought was frightening. But now I think I've changed my mind. He reached out and placed Fuzzy gently in the Black Doctor's hand. I want you to keep him, he said. I don't think I'll need him anymore. I'll miss him, but I think it would be better if I don't have him now. Be good to him and let me visit him once in a while. The Black Doctor looked at Dal, and then lifted Fuzzy up to his own shoulder. For a moment, the little creature shivered as if afraid. Then he blinked twice at Dal, trustingly, and snuggled in comfortably against the Black Doctor's neck. Without a word, Dal turned and walked out of the office. As he stepped down the corridor, he waited fearfully for the wave of desolation and loneliness he had felt before when Fuzzy was away from him. But there was no hint of those desolate feelings in his mind now. And after all, he thought, why should there be? He was not a Garvian any longer. He was a star surgeon from Hospital Earth. He smiled as he stepped from the elevator into the main lobby and crossed through the crowd to the street doors. He pulled his scarlet cape tightly around his throat. Drawing himself up to the full height of which he was capable, he walked out of the building and strode down onto the street. End of Chapter 14. The End of Star Surgeon by Alan E. Nourse.